Well, good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Josh Immels, publisher and CEO of the Los Angeles Business Journal. It's a pleasure to host yet another real estate strategies discussion. This is now the fourth in our series over the past year, and based on the inquiries that we continue to receive from our subscribers, it's clear that real estate, office environments, and issues that are impacting both are still at the forefront of our readers' minds. So today we have the opportunity to hear from and engage with some of our region's most knowledgeable experts. Let me tell you, the next hour is going to break down. We are going to pack a lot of information into a short time. We'll have two 30-minute panels. We'll begin with today's market, and then we'll move into industry trends. Many of you submitted questions during the registration process, and so we were able to incorporate them into our Q&A. So thank you for being active and participating in that. During the interactive discussions that we're about to have, we're also going to be conducting live audience poll questions. So when you see these pop up on your screen, we encourage you to share your thoughts and experiences. We'll then publish these results online next week. I'd like to thank each of our 5 sponsors for their commitment to keeping our readers informed. So many thanks to Alpha Omega Contractors, CBiz and MHM, Farmers and Merchants Bank, Swinnerton, and Thompson Coburn. Thank you all for all that you do to support this program, and also for your support of our community of business in general. All right, like I said, we've got a lot of information that we've packed in here, so let's get started. I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Please welcome our first panel. Casey Garcia, Senior Director, Southwest Region Lead at CBRE. Ray Hodge, Senior Vice President and Region Manager of Swinnerton. David Gelati, President of Alpha Omega Contractors. And today's moderator, Jim Cruz, CEO of DPI Retail. Welcome back, Jim. It's great to see you. Jim, you may still be on mute.
How's that for a good start? Anyway, Josh, happy to be back, and I'm really looking forward to this panel. The primary focus is going to be on the workplace and the feelings and the attitudes of the occupants and how they exist in that workspace. It's been a tough year, and a lot of people's minds have changed about office attendance. And so with that, there might be a strategy that gets incorporated into how people are going to behave in the workplace, how they're going to function. And so we've got a real good strategist coming from CBRE. And I'll direct the first question to everybody, but I'll start off with Casey. So what are your thoughts, Casey, on the hybrid workplace strategy? What does that mean from a real estate standpoint? Who is doing it? What are the success stories, the pitfalls? What do you know about it?
Yeah, you've asked a big question to kick us off, Jim. Thank you for that one. I think the first thing that I want to mention is that there's not a singular definition for hybrid across or even within organizations. So I'll just mention a few of the definitions that are most common that we've come across. In some instances, it's going to mean that certain roles or functions may work 100% remote while others remain on site. And it's kind of a binary decision one way or the other. And that way an organization will be hybrid because they have representatives in both camps. Other times it might mean more of a blended approach where across all different roles and departments, they kind of make a judgment call around saying, well, this role is going to work 2 days a week on site, this role 3 days a week. It might vary. They might pick core days. There's almost an infinite number of ways that I'm seeing organizations start to tackle this, but all of it is in response to what a rising kind of demand, I'd say, from the workforce for something to change, because we've now lived through such a defining moment in work history, right? The COVID experience of working remote, it wasn't just a couple weeks. It was a full year, in some cases full year plus for those who are still just starting their return to office journeys. And so it's been seen as a proof of concept that remote work is possible. Now we're just kind of having to merge that with what leadership needs, right, around building strong connections between employees, strong cultures, engagement, stickiness, things that benefit from being on site with what their employees are demanding, which is greater flexibility. Now, what this means for real estate, just briefly, is that of course we're now anticipating changes in expected occupancy, which will obviously dictate the overall demand for how much space an occupier needs and how it's designed. And I think it's the latter part that's most interesting here, because certainly some organizations may find that they'll need less space, right? Since they might be planning for their employees to work on site less frequently. But it's just as likely, and I think more challenging to figure out, what kind of space they need and what purpose their space needs to serve going forward. And our data from CBRE is pointing towards really three major purposes for the workplace going forward. And they're easy to remember because they all start with a C. It's culture, it's community, and it's collaboration. So thinking about that, I think that more than anything is going to define this hybrid experience around kind of rallying behind those very people-centric ideals and delivering a real estate strategy that's intended towards those.
All right, so Ray, you're the one that's charged with building all of this space, in as much as it might be different, much different than what we experienced before. What are you seeing from clients? What are they asking you to do? What is it going to look like?
Thanks, Jim, and happy to be back on the panel. It's really still, I think what we all can agree on, it's a different world today than it was pre-pandemic. So people are just getting back to trying to figure out how our employees actually feel, because 16 or 18 months into it, the one thing that we see and we hear all the time is, well, we need to be all more flexible with how we approach our business and our employees. So just going back to what Casey was talking about, this whole hybrid concept is so it's not defined yet, and we're still trying to figure out with our clients and developers what is going to work for them, because it's tricky, as you can imagine. But what they are all consistent is they need to have a flexible approach, because the priorities of the employees have changed, and what they were looking for before is very different than what it is now. And between surveys and meetings and readings and stuff, we're still trying to figure out, what the best setup is. But definitely, it's going to be. It seems like less space is needed, just because there will be some kind of rotation and allow people to work out of office or from home.
Thank you, Ray. So David, is that what you're seeing as well? Is there going to be this flexibility towards letting people rotate in and out? That's part one. And part two is, what will the space look like after coming out of this pandemic? What modifications do you have to make to the space that you're building now to maybe anticipate another problem?
Yeah, I'm definitely on seeing that transpire, as that people are trying to adapt to the workspace and bringing in a kind of a new way of looking at how they bring their employees in, and has really modified the space. There's been about a dozen different projects that we've worked on in the last 6 months where it's transformed the office space to be more friendly with the commuting. So I think that one of the best things that employees are finding is the actual not having to commute is saving time and money for both the employer and the employee. So they've been modifying the workspaces and moving the workspaces more towards the employee to shorten their drive time. So we're finding, instead of one large office, we're finding that these offices are splitting up and doing smaller satellite offices in order to take that on. So some of the pitfalls on doing that is just to really try to find out and get the right strategy and how to calculate who you're gonna have where, and how you're gonna diversify your overall real estate portfolio, and how that's gonna affect the construction. You take one office and do it all up, all new, or do you take it and modify it, and how is that gonna affect each individual budget, and how they deal with the landlord on their leasing terms on different properties.
Okay, that's a good place where I'd like to jump in there for a minute. So Ray and Casey, what does this do to the landlord? What does this growth mean? If somebody wants to grow their company and they want to continue solid culture, but yet people are in and out of the office, just the door is revolving, what is the impact on that to both the owner of that company, the operator of that company, and the worker in particular?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Really good question, because pre-pandemic, I personally was one of those managers that the happier I was, the more people I saw in the office, just because I felt that's what our culture is all about, and collaboration. And post-pandemic, we proved to ourselves in the last 15, 16 months that we can produce and we can be efficient from working from home. So efficiency and productivity was not an issue for us as a general contractor, believe it or not, even though we did see a little bit of an issue because we always expected our field employees to go to the job sites, and we gave more flexibility to our admin employees to work from home. So that created a little bit of an issue culturally of, are all the employees equal, and is the safety of some more critical than others? So we had to step back and rethink about that. As a general contractor, it's a little bit more complicated. But I think, Jim, the biggest question is, what culture do you want for your organization? And to start thinking with the employees about how do you develop, maintain such a culture in a hybrid, flexible, more open setup to allow all that to happen. So there's a lot of work that's happening right now that is happily to say, forcing us to revisit the way we did things in the past and rethink of who we are and the culture that we want to develop and how to keep our employees, most importantly, happy.
All right, that's a great setup, Ray, and I want to toss this one to Casey. So Casey, you're the workplace strategist, and playing off of what Ray had to say, the cultural impact and being able to have great workspace environments. How is this all impacted now?
Yeah, I'll build on something, Ray, that you said, which is that certainly I think we're all in agreement that efficiency while working from home is possible. I think the key here, though, is to recognize the difference between productivity in its kind of raw sense of did the work get done compared to innovation, creativity, things that are more abstract and nebulous. That's what I'm seeing my clients turn towards on both the landlord and the occupier side, is really trying to key into that and create experience. And I mean experience in the capital E Disney kind of way. That's really unparalleled, something that you can't get while working from home. So now we're competing for occupancy against the allure of working from your couch without pants and not fighting traffic and all these things. How do we motivate rather than mandate employees to come into the office, creating that destination workplace type of environment? And the inspiration is actually really coming from retail and from hospitality, and thinking about how do we create that wow factor, those things that make people feel like it was worth the drive, make people feel like there's something unique taking place. And again, it goes back to those 3 C's, right? A lot of it has to do with kind of creating moments for people to connect with each other. But overall, that's what I'm seeing most of my clients try to do instead, is say, hey, you know, we're never going to be able to recreate the creature comforts of home and compete head on in that sense, right, with what people want from the remote work experience. So we're not going to try. We're going to stay in our lane. We're going to kind of create something unique, distinguishable, differentiated, that will be part and parcel of kind of the overall flow of an employee's week or day or whatever else it might be.
So I'm a little bit conflicted here. All of us are in the growth business. We want companies to take more space. We want to see growth of all of these businesses, because that is how simply we get paid. So coming, David, to you, you are out there building buildings, but if all of a sudden the needs on behalf of these tenants is less, how do you take and format that to your boss and to your stockholders? how is it that you're going to take and find growth in your business?
And the best way to find growth in your business is truly to adapt. I think everybody with this new environment of it all going digital, we're having to find ways to bring a higher level of value to your clients. Just because the spaces are smaller, but more technology is going to be needed. So it's going to be, the projects are going to have to be more involved in order to give people the technology and the amenities that they really need. If someone is going to be leaving their house to come to work 2-3 days a week, if it's a hybrid method, they're really going to want to have a spot, a place that gives them the amenities so they feel like they want to come here, so they want to collaborate, they want to work with people. So the way that they're going to find the value in the space, the value adds that we're really going to do is our abilities to make these spaces different and better than ever before. And as I mentioned before, by everybody spreading out and everybody going back, can maybe come and finding buildings that are more commercial buildings that are built a little bit more in suburbia, that are closest to you. So some of the stuff's going to spread out a little bit more. And then what we will feel is we'll start to see these things transition and those office areas start to develop a little bit more. So I think everything's just going to shuffle. And I don't think the demand's going to go away in its entirety. I think it's just like anything else, it's going to change. If we can provide higher touch, better technology, and different experiences to everybody, I think that's what's going to bring more business to somebody like in a commercial setting, from the brokers, even to the landlords, and then to your contractor, because we're going to provide these services. And by providing these services, that's where we're going to find more revenue as a general contractor.
Okay, fair enough. So Casey, I want to come right back to you. You're in the culture business. You're the one that goes out and helps kind of create these workspaces. And Ray, you'll have some thoughts on this too, but if people are dialing in from their couch and they're doing, what we're doing here with these Zoom calls and that type of thing, how does that foster culture?
Yeah, in some ways it's more difficult, in some ways it's not. I think where it's most difficult is where people are dialing in from their couch and people are on site, because it creates an inequitable experience between the two. I think we've all had that moment, or had these kinds of meetings in the past, where you've got several people in a room and someone on the phone is trying to get a word in edgewise and trying to point out, hey, I can't see what you're writing on the whiteboard because you chose a green marker, or whatever else it is, right? And it's just, it doesn't really connect those physical and digital worlds. That's going to be kind of our biggest challenge in addressing culture in this new hybrid future, is thinking about ways to just kind of create better equality amongst what those experiences will be. And I would say this honestly, regardless of whether an organization is personally considering very much remote work for themselves, because your clients are going to be on the move. We're increasingly in a global world, if not a national one, where business takes place beyond just the walls or the reaches of our own interstate highways. And so this is something that we're going to need to solve. I think that as well, though, what it's also pointing towards is that space, meaning furniture and walls, really can't be your panacea, right? It doesn't solve all things. I love space. I'm in the business of space, right? And we all appreciate real estate on this call. But if it's not supported by an ecosystem of technology, and almost more importantly, behaviors, you're not going to get the most out of it. And so I think increasingly what we're seeing from the workplace strategy side of things is a coalition, not only in the expertise that we have to draw on in order to deliver high performing workplace environments to our clients, but also in who we need to partner with within an organization. And I'm starting to see structural changes in how organizations, teams are kind of creating themselves, where it's not facilities anymore, but instead it's kind of an elevated, almost like chief places officer type of role, where we're liaising with HR and IT and finance and all the senior business units. This is something that touches every corner of the business, and if done right, can elevate itself towards really high-minded goals like talent attraction and retention and innovative edge and all kinds of things that attract the attention of all C-suite officers.
Thank you, Casey. So Ray and David, throughout my career, I can sum up most real estate companies' business plan going forward in one word, and it's more. We want more opportunities, bigger projects. We want the ability to grow revenue. So at least that has been my observation. So with you two fellows being actively involved in big projects, big companies around the United States, how do you grow? How does a contracting company, a builder, how do you guys grow?
I mean, I think we're very lucky to be in LA. So that's definitely a much easier answer than maybe other regions in the country. But I'll speak for Swinnerton. We've been in business 133 years. It seems like most of the companies go bankrupt or out of business in actually a hot economy, not in a bad economy. So definitely there's a lot of market. Looking at what's going on now, and you're right, it seems like things got on pause for 15 months. And all of a sudden, I don't think I've ever seen the LA market busier than it is these days, probably going back to 2015 when it was also booming around that time. But we do see a lot of opportunities currently in the market. I think just where we're at with LA and knowing that the World Cup, soccer coming up, Olympics are coming up, everything that's going on with LAX. Really, we're seeing a lot of opportunities. Now we're seeing a lot of exercising. Not sure who eventually goes and starts building, because there's a lot of cost escalation that is hitting the market. People are developers, and everyone is panicking. Subcontractors are struggling with kind of maintaining their pricing. So I think in the next 6 months, there's going to be a lot of exercising until things settle down a little bit. And I would imagine next year we're going to have a similar problem that we had 5-6 years ago, which is having qualified resources or labor actually in the L area to do all the work that's coming up. So for Swinnerton, we're just going to stay selective, strategic. It's all driven by the qualified employees that you have and being able to not to kind of overcommit.
All right, so David, you're president of Alpha Omega. What's the biggest challenge you see for the sector, not necessarily Alpha and Omega, but the biggest challenge for the sector going forward, being able to find these opportunities for profit, for growth?
I think it's going to be the being strategic. I think Ray had really said it best, is that, it's the contractors really find themselves not around anymore in these industries when they're in the hot times, because when the tide comes out, you find out how poorly things were ran. So I think when he was talking about all of us being exercised, there's heavy amounts of exercising. So I think really what's going to come down to, I think it's going to come down to the right client with the right contract or the right relationships, because the right information is what's going to make the landlord and or any investor that's got to be having their own business or wherever they're strategically putting themselves, for them to be able to be successful. So it's really the information that we're going to be provided and how we can find these different product types and where we have to be to help businesses to be in a strategic location. For a general contractor, it's going to be able to find the right clients, such as different landlords that are willing to push the envelope, that are willing to think more of a 10, 15 to 20-year plan, because people that think narrow-minded a lot in the LA market, what I've noticed over the last 20 years, those are the people that you don't see after 5-6 years. They don't go after the long-term game plan. So I think it's finding the right clients, finding the right environment, and very most important is getting the right information, especially right now with inflated prices. With the inflation doing what it's doing, and we're not us being very unsure if it's transitory or not, we're about to find out. We're about to find out with products, with our product supply chain switching from China to local or to wherever it's going to go. All that information is going to be very crucial to the bottom line of all these companies, from landlords to small businesses to healthcare providers, to anybody that's coming into the Orange County, LA, or Southern California market, or globally.
Thank you, Dave. Casey, as you're working with tenants and you're plotting their strategies and trying to formulate plans going forward, what is the biggest mistake or the two biggest mistakes you're seeing some of your occupants make as they're going through planning for the next 5 to 7 years?
I think that there are two big mistakes. I think that the first big mistake is falling in love with space savings, and I'll elaborate on that in a second. And the second mistake is trying to over-engineer a solution, and I'll elaborate on both of those. So the first is around, thinking about, well, I'll start with the over-engineering the solution. Actually, it makes more sense to start there. So I think what's clear right now is that there's no certainty for the future. Everybody wants to future-proof, and also everybody's very nervous about where people are going to be working. And where I've seen clients make measurable mistakes is going in very heavy-handed with a policy that doesn't leave a lot of actual room for flexibility. They're responding to that call by employees by saying, well, we'll technically give you flexibility. You're going to be allowed to work a day a week from home or a day a month from home, and some of the most restrictive, right? And be very prescriptive about which days they're allowed to work from home and what the rules are around that. And it's not really meeting the needs that are at the heart of why employees are asking for that. And they say, well, what happens if I have a child who's sick? Or what happens if I have an appointment and I need to move things around? And if there's not that kind of assumption that we can move with it, then everything kind of falls apart in that sense. And quite frankly, it's leading to a lot of resignations. This is anecdotal. I don't have any hard stats on this, but a lot of my clients who have made announcements in somewhat of a premature way have seen an uptick in people leaving the company. Now, whether this is just an overall national trend because people are getting a little bit deep post-COVID and there's all kinds of shuffling around, who's to say, but it is interesting that those ones that are hitting the hammer hard and fast are the ones that are seeing the most negative after effects on this. Now, the second pitfall is somewhat related to that, where I was mentioning that they were falling in love too much with the space savings. And this kind of is almost the exact opposite reaction. Some of my clients, to the point of embracing flexibility, they're starting to do some math in their head, some inelegant math, but some math. And they're saying, well, if I have 50% of my employees working from home, maybe I only need 50% of my space. And this is where we have to kind of have them pause and say, I understand why that sounds very attractive. Rent is expensive and you don't want to be underutilizing your space. But to oversimplify the equation in such a way kind of misses the point of what that flexibility is going to do to the way your employees work. And again, it goes back to why people need to use the space. And you've got to think about the overall demand. Maybe you're getting rid of seats. You might be getting rid of workstations or offices even, because people are going to be doing more of their individual work at home. But you might need, depending on what your current space is built like, you might need more of other stuff. You might need more conference rooms. You might need more amenity space. And how this kind of comes out in the balance doesn't always neatly work out to an exact 50% reduction. Certainly, we always do think that consolidation can be possible, but you have to work realistically and balance not just efficiency. You've got to be focusing on efficiency, effectiveness, engagement, all kinds of other E words, right? In order to make sure that you're not just appealing to the lowest common denominator.
Okay, so we have all survived at some level, and we've emerged from a real set of weird circumstances over the last 14 months. It's been tough. Everywhere you go and everything you read, every news channel you turn on, there are continuing challenges. So with that kind of as the backdrop, and all of us have graduated from this slow walk through hell, here's my question. I want you to finish this sentence. No way will I ever again do blank. Ray.
No way I will ever again do blank.
From a business standpoint, Ray.
Yes, of course. I wasn't going to shock you with something else. I think the last 15 months, I will never go back and mandate our employees to work full-time from the office. I learned a good lesson with that, and that's something I would never do again.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. Casey, take a shot at that.
Mine is maybe a little more personal, but I think speaks to something we've all experienced. Mine is that I will never schedule a meeting over lunch again, because I definitely took the opportunity, I think as many of us did, for the changes of COVID to make changes to my own daily routine. And so that was one of the things I wanted to do. I said, I want to be healthier, during COVID, and I want to have better work-life balance. And that was something I often found myself doing, is just packing my day all full of meetings. But having that hour during the day that I could always count on being able to focus on myself really made a huge difference in my energy levels and stamina. And I think that wellness in particular, now that we're especially aware of the relationship between the built environment and our health, coming out of COVID is top of mind for everyone. And so these little life hacks, I think, are being very well talked about in the workplace strategy circles.
Great, thank you, Casey. So David, this is just kind of a cute way to maybe kind of sum up one of your biggest lessons over the last 14 months. No way.
I think one of my biggest lessons is not taking all the information that you're giving and fully dissect it in the environment that you're giving it. Just because it's kind of like goes back to when things are red hot, thinking that it's always going to be good and not looking at some of the negatives. So I think the biggest thing that I'll never again is never, always, try not to see everything always in a positive light, but try to see some of that negative, strategically plan for the unforeseen, for this environment that came up. If we would have been strategically planned a little bit better, and knowing that, the digital age was upon us, and not ignoring that the digital age was coming. It just was coming at lightning speed this time. So never take for granted that the ability that things have to change on a dime.
Great. Well, listen, on behalf of the LA Business Journal and this vast audience that we've been broadcasting to, Ray, Casey, and David, let me thank you for your expertise and the work you've put in on this. Josh, there's your panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. How about a virtual round of applause for our first panel here? Absolutely outstanding information. Thank you for all that you're doing to work with the business community as they look to make changes and adjustments moving forward. So many thanks, Jim, Casey, Ray, and David. Okay, now we're going to move on to industry trends. So let's meet our panelists. First, we've got Phil Bond, Executive Vice President, Chief Credit Officer of Farmers and Merchants Banks. Jason Grinnell, Partner Real Estate with Thompson Coburn. Paul Rosenkranz, Managing Director at CBiz and MHM. And today's moderator, Kofi Nardi, CEO of Global Red. Great to see you again, Kofi. Welcome back.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. It's an exciting day. I've taken a bunch of notes already from the first panel, and I'm excited to moderate the second panel. And I'm personally just wanted to thank you and the LA Business Journal for putting on these events, especially coming out of COVID, to be able to bring great, like-minded, but a diversity of thought and thought leadership that really helps us really blaze the path moving forward, because it's access to these different aspects of the business that are concentric circles that overlap that really create a sweet spot for all of us in navigating what's been, a very rapidly paced, segment of the market to navigate. So thanks again for that. And without further ado, I'd love to go ahead and jump right in. So this first question, again, for our diverse panel, everyone touching real estate or financing real estate in some capacity, is for everyone, whoever wants to go first. So we've heard about some of the various challenges of working from home, everything from culture, psychology, productivity. I think Casey did a great job of touching on several of those things. Will there ever be any legislation giving home workers rights and benefits? Why don't we start with Jason?
Look, we're in California, right? There's clearly going to be legislation. My partners who do a lot of labor and employment work here at Thompson Coburn, they're constantly busy dealing with workplace cases, and it's only just going to be a matter of time before this new environment kind of segues into those sorts of things where there's going to be legislation, regulations, etc.
Awesome. Phil?
I agree 100% with Jason. I think some form of additional legislation to address the increase in work from home is inevitable. And I think it'll touch on a lot of different fronts. I think it's going to be incumbent on employers to make sure that just the basic ergonomic setup for their employees at home is good, so they can, really address all aspects of employee well-being. In other words, they need a good chair. They've got to make sure that the monitors and all are at the right height, that they're not hesitant to ask for new equipment. So I think we're in for a real wave of changes here, and legislation will certainly be one of those fronts that we'll see it on.
Paul, I want to hear from you as well, but just before that, Jason, coming back to you for a second, it is California, so legislation is coming. Is there anywhere that people can turn or corporations can turn to seek advice for even how to navigate and what to start looking for in that space?
Well, I mean, obviously, attorneys, especially ones that have a presence up in Sacramento or, dealing with the local communities, obviously they're a resource. There's a variety of consultants out there who, make their living by kind of walking through and keeping their fingers on the pulse. So I think that's exactly kind of the the ways to go if you're an employer or an employee trying to make sure that you're tracking kind of where things are going.
Excellent. And Paul, your take on the question. You're muted, Paul.
I'm sorry about that. I said I agree with the others that because remote working is here to stay, that there inevitably will be some legislation. In my business, public accounting, and in other service businesses, it's very competitive to hire talent. And if one firm offers a remote environment, we have to, otherwise we're going to lose a candidate because salaries and other benefits are very similar among all the firms. We're finding that remote workforce is working extremely well. The biggest key is communication. It's even more prevalent than when you're physically together. But as long as you have timely communication, in our business at least, we've been able to be very successful and haven't really noticed any drop-off in efficiency.
Awesome, awesome. So Jason, coming back to you from the legal perspective, how do you see the continuing eviction moratorium impacting the commercial leasing and commercial lending worlds?
Well, I mean, obviously, this has been one of the biggest sticks that landlords and lenders have had for decades. You've always had the ability, if your tenant has not paid rent, you've had the ability to go in and evict them. If your borrower hasn't paid its note or its mortgage payments, you've had the ability to go in and foreclose. So this is a pretty sizable shillelagh that's been taken away from the parties over the last 15, 18 months or so. It looks like now we're seeing some of the softening here as the Judicial Council and various communities are realizing that this is stretching on a lot longer than anybody had anticipated. So I think where we're going to see is there's going to be a really big push for potential cases and things along those lines as kind of the numbers continue to improve.
So coming back to financing, this one's for you, Phil. How are low interest rates and high real estate prices impacting the commercial real estate landscape?
Thanks for the question, Kofi. I think Ray on the previous panel touched on it when he commented about how busy things are right here in LA these days on the commercial real estate front. Clearly, I think low interest rates are enabling a lot of that development. I think they're right there in terms of top factors contributing to those activity levels that we're seeing across property types, multifamily, industrial, and on down through a lot of special purpose properties as well, are all enjoying the bump provided by low interest rates. It's something we have to be very careful about because there's clearly a knock-on effect as it relates to overall investment return expectations and risk premium. It's the same real estate risk, folks just aren't getting paid the same for it.
No, we're seeing the exact same thing. So my firm, we do traditional residential brokerage, but also development with investment properties and investors. And the interest rates, even from bridge financing to permanent financing, it's all low, but we're hedging that against the cost of construction, the cost of lumber, these things that are continuing to tick back up. So it's a delicate balance. So moving on to Phil, coming back to you. On a grand scale, can you provide an overview of the Biden administration's proposed tax changes that may impact the real estate industry?
Kofi, I think that was probably directed towards me.
Paul, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, okay, not a problem. Well, there's, as I'm sure everyone listening knows, President Biden has proposed a wide array of income and estate tax changes. Some of them would affect all industries, including real estate, such as the increase in the top ordinary rate from 37 to 39.6%. But some of them, which particularly will affect real estate, and I'll get to the elephant in the room in just a moment, would be the expansion of the Medicare investment tax, as well as the self-employment tax, to more forms of pass-through income. And pass-through income in my business is really referred to income from partnerships, limited liability companies, and S corporations. So there's talk of extending that. Another item that affects real estate folks greatly is to propose to put a permanent cap on the ability to claim real estate losses against other sorts of income. That cap currently is, the temporary cap is currently $500,000 for a married couple, half that for a single taxpayer. And that would dramatically impact real estate professionals that prior to these caps could take an unlimited amount of these tax losses, generally through depreciation, against all sorts of income. But the elephant in the room is clearly the proposed repeal of 1031 exchanges, where the gain is more than $500,000. My client base is heavily in real estate. Some of them use exchanges religiously and haven't really sold a property for cash for eons. That's having a dramatic impact on, in my opinion, on real estate transactions today. I have clients who are taking advantage of the high prices due greatly to, as Phil said, to the low interest rates. And they're going ahead and executing 1031 exchanges where maybe previously they would have been on the fence. No one has a crystal ball. I certainly don't. But in my opinion, they will not end up doing away with 1031s entirely, because I think the impact on the economy would be dramatic and widely felt. But it is very possible that they could limit them, perhaps by limiting the number of times that one property could be exchanged. Because I have clients who have been exchanging for 40 plus years, and I could see them putting a cap on the number of exchanges. How that would be enforced, though, is another matter. So clearly there are several changes that President Biden has proposed that are going to have dramatic effect. It'll be interesting to see in the next weeks and months what actually gets enacted into law.
No, thanks for that perspective. I think we're all sitting on pins and needles to see where that goes. And hopefully it is just some sort of meeting in the middle, because I know a lot of people will be impacted that may not necessarily be the intended impacted group. So we'll see where that lands. Jason, given the financing environment and tax changes on the horizon, what types of deals are you seeing currently, particularly in Southern California?
Well, I mean, we're seeing, a lot of clients, especially like more in the family office, that are, exactly like what Paul was saying. There's some concern that there's possibly going to be some 1031 repeal or changes to that. So, we're seeing a lot of velocity in, taking a look at, possible exits, or kind of looking forward, in the next, say, 6 to 9 months, if the 1031 exchange is going away. On more of a transactional side of my practice, we're seeing an awful lot of both office and retail deals that, they're looking for the flexibility, very similar to what the previous panel talked about, and like what Jim knows oh so well, which is, retailers may be looking for, just trying to take slightly less space and subleasing, or, offices are trying to figure out how to kind of navigate the next, sort of, few years of their office term and trying to figure out, okay, well, maybe we don't need 15,000 square feet, but maybe we need like 10,000, but we want to keep the 5 just in case we want to have an eye towards growth in the long term. So we're seeing a lot of this, trying to figure out what that right path is. There's also an awful lot of work in the healthcare space and a lot of new players that are really kind of coming in. We're seeing this convergence with drugstore companies and setting up, parts of their spaces or other drugstores with some sort of health services type thing. And so there's just a lot of kind of new creation of interesting submarkets.
So I'm just going to follow that up with a selfish question. My firm is called Global Real Estate and Development. So we look at stuff, work with developers from around the country and around the globe. Are you seeing more people open to repositioning of underperforming assets? And also, are you seeing a willingness to invest, beyond state lines just to get better deals or to pursue, underdeveloped opportunities that can be, repositioned for growth strategies?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the key developments recently over the last few years has been, this concept of ghost kitchens, right? Where it's like a delivery only restaurant with food delivery, apps that are connected to that. And you're seeing a lot of underdeveloped or B or C class space being used, for those sorts of purposes. I think those things will definitely kind of continue to expand. Lots of industrial areas are going to take a look at opportunities to find kind of creative uses there. And then I think with respect to crossing state lines and looking at other regions, obviously everybody's looking at Texas, and there's some other states that are a little bit more business friendly. And so I think you're always going to have a flow to better business environments or better returns. We just need a couple of cold snaps to kind of go through Texas a couple more times, and people may realize that Southern California still has some inherent advantages.
That's it. My in-laws are in Texas, so I won't comment on that. I'll leave that one alone. All right, so Phil, this next one is for you. We just heard from Jason on what his firm, their clients are looking at. From a banking perspective, what specialized types of commercial real estate loans does F&M Bank offer or even excel at? So in essence, how can you help in this department?
In terms of loan types that we offer that are really, I'll say, in favor today, we have a number of our clients that are looking for great flexibility in terms of access to funds. So how do we assist them with that? Long established relationships here, multi-generational clients of ours will bring in a portfolio of lowly leveraged companies, lowly leveraged real estate, and we'll put together what we call a master loan agreement. Deed of trust will cover all the properties, and we'll give them a commitment up to X dollars, and they can draw that down in the form of various subnotes. So they can use some of the dollars to do development work. They can use some of the dollars for perm purposes and the like. So we're being pressed for greater flexibility across the board. Of note here recently, with regards specifically to office, we've had a number of clients approach us with requests to refinance existing debt. As you can imagine, they want the longest and lowest rate scenarios possible, but they'd also like to have built in a provision or a holdback of funds to cover future TIs and leasing commission. So I think, as eloquent as Casey was earlier and some of the others on the first panel, what are the amenities in a building? What is the layout going to look like, and who's going to pay for it? And our borrowers really want an opportunity to kind of lock up that availability in their credit structures today in anticipation of those requests from their tenants going forward.
I think that's amazing. I actually just wrote that down as an option for some of the clients we work with, being able to bundle their portfolios and create that master loan agreement against it. And then the future TIs, that's going to be critical in terms of where office is going and the hybrid work from home, coming into the office. I think the ability to transition the space is going to be critical. So I think those are invaluable offerings. Paul, coming back to you, going back to potential tax changes. What are possible alternatives to 1031 exchanges if the Biden administration is successful in eliminating those for all taxpayers?
Well, that's a great question. And the short answer is there's nothing around today that is going to provide someone with all the benefits of 1031s. With that said, there are some techniques which would provide partial benefits. One of them is the qualified opportunity zone investments, QOZs as they're known. Those came into place in 2017 under President Trump. Those investments allow someone selling an asset, it doesn't have to be real estate, to defer 10% of their gain, to exclude 10% of their gain currently from federal taxation, and defer the recognition of the 90% of the gain until 2026. So you do have to provide for paying that tax in a few years. The big advantage also of qualified opportunity zones are if you invest in one and you hold that asset more than 10 years, the gain from the sale of that asset is 100% federal tax free. So that's a very large potential advantage. I did emphasize federal because some states, including of course, California, no surprise, do not follow qualified opportunity zones. So that's something that some of my clients who have looked into or have made the investments, I have to remind them that you still have California tax, which in many cases is quite substantial compared to what their federal tax would be. So QOZs are definitely something that are popular today and do offer some alternatives to 1031s. Something else has been around forever. Those are charitable remainder trusts known as CRTs. Those allow a taxpayer to transfer a highly appreciated asset to this trust. And then the trust, which is the tax exempt entity, can sell the asset with no gain. The advantages to the taxpayer is number one, they will get a charitable deduction for the transfer of the asset to that CRT. And then the money, and then they would be structured. There's different ways to structure them, but generally there's an annual payment that comes back to the taxpayer from the CRT. That payment is coming from the invested fund, the sale proceeds. And those proceeds that come out are taxed partially at capital gains, partially at ordinary rates, and a part of it is a tax-free return on basis. So CRTs are helpful, but one of the criteria I remind clients is you do need to have a charitable intent, because at the end of the day, what's left in the CRT does go to your charity and not to your heirs. Life insurance folks who may be on this call would remind us that you can use the tax savings to buy a life insurance policy to replace the assets that the heirs do not receive. Another technique that has come into vogue lately, and I think it's going to become more popular and also will generate more IRS scrutiny, are deferred sales trusts. And that's a transaction that generally involves the taxpayer selling for a note a property to a trust run by an independent but friendly trustee. That trust then goes ahead and sells the property for a similar price to the ultimate buyer. The trust receives this chunk of money. They would have little or no gain. And then the trust makes payments out to the taxpayer pursuant to the note. That can work very well, but it comes into that category in taxes of a little cute, and the IRS tends not to like such transactions. And I would suspect that if 1031s are eliminated and these deferred sales trusts become more popular, that there's a good chance that we're going to see legislation from the IRS that may take away some of the benefits of these DSTs. But those are three of the items, Kofi, that exist. And I'm sure that if 1031s are actually done away with, that there will be many more developed by some smart people.
Awesome, thank you for that. So just so we get everything in time, we're going to go sort of rapid fire on these next few questions, but we definitely want to get through them. So Jason, coming back to you, are there particular changes in your clients' transactions that have been triggered or accelerated by the pandemic? And do you think those changes are temporary or permanent?
Yeah, well, so I mean, like what we've seen is, just things were already starting to like shift to like a work from home type thing, and then more flexibility given technology. And I think that the pandemic has really just accelerated those sorts of things. So, and I do think these sorts of changes are going to be permanent, just like what we've talked about in the last couple of panels.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And I think that people are embracing them as permanent because a lot of them are more efficient, more effective, and have cost savings built into them. So why go back, right? Paul, another tax question, more on the individual side of taxes. What may be the impact of the Biden administration's estate tax changes on their heirs to an estate with income producing real estate?
Well, there's two items, Kofi. Number one is he has proposed that capital gains on real estate and other assets above $1 million per taxpayer exemption would be subject to tax at death. So that's on top of any estate tax. So that's number one. You would have to pay tax on a real estate asset that you haven't sold. And then the other item, which directly hits real estate, is the loss in the step up in basis. Because under current law, people get to reset the clock at the current value and they get to redepreciate. The heirs get to redepreciate the property. That provides a tremendous benefit to the heirs tax. And doing away with that would have a substantial negative impact on my real estate clients.
Awesome. So Phil, we are coming back to you. We heard a bit from the first panel on how workspaces are currently changing. So what are you hearing from your business clients as far as downsizing their space versus expansion to account for social distancing in the workplace?
I think really along the lines of the first panel, folks are factoring in their culture, what type of collaboration is required. Is it in person? Is it something that can be done via Zoom as we are here today? And really still in the middle of making any final assessments in terms of what the future looks like for them. Shifting over very quickly to the borrowers we work with that own office buildings in particular, we're seeing them really dig into their rent rolls to take a look at what those tenant expectations are. So again, they can anticipate TI levels, leasing commission levels, find out about any intentions anyone has for subleasing and the like. So just heightened activity and awareness there. And if we stumble across a borrower who's not doing that, from a lender's perspective, that's a concern that they're not digging in as we're seeing some of the best in the business do right now.
That's it. And another great takeaway. I took a full page of notes on that first panel and one on this panel, but the equity of the experience for work from home versus in person. I hadn't really thought about that to the degree that they discussed. So I thought that was a great point in making sure everyone is getting and receiving, experiencing the information and culture that you're trying to convey. So last question. Here we are. Let's end this conversation with each of you completing this sentence. From now on, I will absolutely, you fill in the blank. Jason, we'll start with you.
Well, I mean, from now on, I absolutely will, make sure that, I don't have my cat walking in the background when I've got a Zoom call or things like that. But in all seriousness, I think, absolutely making sure that, we do our best to kind of embrace, the flexibility of the work from home, but also do it in a way that, has boundaries, because I think burnout and the feeling of always having to be on is real. And, I think that's one of the things that everybody has to be mindful of going forward.
Thank you. Phil.
We have a tendency to be very task oriented here, checklist driven and the like. And I think, again, going back to the culture, we've been around for 114 years. We have a very core sense of our values in terms of how we treat our clients, our communities, and one another. I think just keeping that care, concern, empathy for our colleagues, in particular on a day-to-day basis, front and center, really rises to the top like it's never risen before.
I think that's critical. Great point. And Paul.
Well, my initial answer to your question, Kofi, was to tell my clients to spend every dime they can, because after income taxes and estate taxes and capital gains taxes at death, there won't be anything left for their children anyway. But seriously, I think the biggest thing is for me to keep an open mind that this remote work environment, I believe, is here to stay, and that things that I did, new business generation in person, is changing, but really just to keep an open mind.
It was in that moment that you made me realize I'm happy my wife isn't listening to this Zoom. I like her to see what I'm doing, but not spend every dime. So my answer to the question, I'll absolutely just continue to diversify the revenue streams that we pursue and also the developments that we pursue for the future, but remain really agile and adapting to the ever-changing needs and landscape that we're facing now. So with that, we're going to wrap things up. You guys, great information. Thank you for your time. Thank you again, Josh, for hosting the panel, for the LA Business Journal, for putting these events on and continuing to contribute to the community.
Thank you so much to our second panel, Kofi, Jason, Phil, and Paul. How about a round of applause for all of our panelists this afternoon? You know, we kept our promise. We said we're going to keep it under an hour, and we're going to provide a ton of information, which I think both panels were successful in doing today. So I want to thank all of our panelists and moderators for their time, for their expertise, and for keeping us informed. Thank you so much. I want to remind you all that Monday's print and digital versions of the LA Business Journal are going to highlight this event. Additionally, if you missed this or any part of it, or if you'd like to send it to anybody who wasn't able to join us live, there will be a recorded version of this entire program available on labusinessjournal.com. We look forward to hosting you soon. Until then, everyone, thank you all so much. Stay healthy. We'll talk soon. Have a good day.